Welcome to another episode of Phrasally, Verbocious. Good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Chris. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
That's a very English language response, isn't it? Not too bad.
Yeah. Or grand, as we say in Ireland, which means either very good or very bad.
I think it's what not bad also means, right? Mm-hmm. What's on the agenda this morning, Alan?
So today I thought we would talk about feedback in the classroom and outside the classroom, because there is 101 different ways of doing it. We're also, as teachers, we're also taught to do it in certain ways that some of us with experience might not necessarily agree. And then I think there's an element of feedback quality to what is handed in, which I think we should talk about later as well.
So I guess maybe we should start with what sort of feedback means, what feedback is. I mean, I think to me, if we remove ourselves from the classroom for just for a second, then feedback, I suppose, is anything which is giving back to an initial stimulus, right? I mean, we have it in the sciences, we have it everywhere, yeah? So it's this idea of some sort of maybe a cycle or a loop.
Yeah, so basically anything that, I mean, there's even the musical feedback of us, or even us having issues with recording a podcast, and you plug in the new headphones that gets a horrible buzzing noise.
Right.
But I think there's different expectations, different levels of quality. I think there has to be a gauge of whether it's useful or not as well, which I think is quite important. I think it's important to when to know when it's constructive and when it's wasting time.
Yes.
Which sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but especially when you're taught.
No, yeah, I was going to say, because I think there's almost a necessity to give feedback, which you must give feedback, isn't it? Like it's one of these things that has to happen, and it does have to happen. But if it's not doing anything, then both you and the person you're feeding back to is not benefiting from the experience, right?
See, I think there's a part of when you're a teacher, and especially when you're starting off as teaching, you feel like you always need to be doing something. You always need to be talking or responding or
praising
taking an active role in the classroom. But then the more experience you get, you go, hang on. If I let the students do this, I'm going to show them the door to what I want to do in this classroom, and they're going to walk through it. You become more of a facilitator than. I think you move away from. I don't want to say the word a lecturer. You don't want to lecture all the time. I do think I prefer the term facilitator much more, because I think it's more accurate.
Yeah, I suppose, well, that's getting a bit more philosophical about what teaching is. But in that respect, yes, because you're providing or facilitating or providing conditions in which to learn and structuring activities. You're potentially giving direct instruction, and that's something that's sometimes called for. But I think, like all of these things, feedback included, it's about choosing what to do and when is the kind of the role of the teacher, yeah. And that's where experience as well as training become useful. Another thing I think about with feedback, so I'm kind of stuck on this idea of it being this cycle or this loop. So I remarked that, okay, so maybe it's not having the desired effect. Well, in which case, the feedback loop continues, right? Because you get feedback as the teacher from the student not acting on your feedback.
And
so maybe you're realizing
that. Yeah.
You're realizing that feedback isn't working, or it's misdirected, or it's actually not the biggest priority. Or I think that's something I think that helps again with experience, is starting to recognize which things are the things to focus on.
Which is useful and which isn't. Yeah. And again, sometimes that changes depending on the class as well. One of the key points of feedback, which has been difficult right now, but once classes are in person, not all feedback is written and language based. So, body language in a classroom tells you a lot about how someone's thinking, how they react to something, their facial expression. There's so much more to feedback than just, this is a good essay. Body language is quite an obvious way of if a kid is getting a language point or not.
I think,
it
especially
isn't
during
just
speaking activities, then definitely that's what that's actually precisely what I'm prioritizing is the body language. Like I don't want to be putting my verbalizing in between the students if they're doing a speaking activity. Thumbs up, or gesturing for more, or facial expressions that look pleased or quizzical, surprised sometimes. These are sort of feedback that can be the kind of encouragement they need to keep going with the task.
yeah.
Especially when they're maybe constructing an idea for the first time in the target language, and they're sort of looking to you for a bit of approval, or the timbre of their voice changes because they're not quite sure that they're constructing it correctly. A good enthusiastic nod and a thumbs up, and a kind of keep going in your eyes, is great feedback because it gives them the room to explore, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I think you were talking about encouraging extra stuff. I think one of the tricks will I use it that I use is we talked about in a previous podcast where I keep a hidden secret notepad in the classroom where I have little boxes for each student where I keep little bits of information about them just so I can, like, in case I forget, certain things about them, whether they have a dog, what the name of it is, that kind of thing, their holidays, that kind of stuff. So especially if the younger learners, you do it with adults as well, but especially if the younger learners give you a writing or something, you can put a tick and a smiley face and a job well done written on their writing. But if you write something personal on that as well for every student,
yes.
even if it only is like a short, sharp sentence, I think it does so much more for the kid when they go, "Oh, you talked about my dog." And like, yeah, I did.
We had
from my cheat sheet.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's showing that you're valuing them as a person, and hearing them as an individual rather than as just a number and a student. I remember from my high school teaching training way back, talking about marking and feedback. We were talking. Slightly different situation in terms of obviously the professional responsibilities of a high school teacher, but the principle still stands. And the lecturer sort of said, a student gives you this text, and you diligently go through it. You make sort of corrections to spelling or grammar. You give it a nice score based on whether it's national curriculum levels or the GCSE criteria, and you haven't realised that it was a cry for help.
Oh, interesting.
You're so busy marking the language, you haven't read the content.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact way the point was being set up, but I think it was actually with the text. I don't remember the provenance of the text, but basically the point was, they set it up as a kind of, okay, so mark this according to this criteria. So we did all of that, and he was like, so did any of your comments mention the fact, or any of your in your minds, were you thinking about the fact this person was quite clearly distressed when they wrote this piece of writing? And obviously it occurred to all of us, and he was like, well, what's the priority here? Why did you all sit there and mark it diligently according to national curriculum criteria when it's quite clear this kid's in trouble? And I can remember that. I can remember where I was sat in the room, and that was 10 years ago, when that point was being made, because it was such a powerful point that, sometimes we can forget the human and what's being written in place of providing feedback on the language that they produced. Yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah.
So your comments about mentioning the dog, I think, is very, very, very key here.
Yeah, because it has to be, even if it is only a short piece of writing that you're handed or you're handing back, there needs to be something personal on it. It needs to be, especially if, like for us, we're private academies after school. So I think rapport is probably even more important because it gets especially the younger learners, you don't want them to feel like it's just an extension of school.
Yes.
But you don't want it to be playtime either. There has to be, a happy medium.
It has to be purposeful.
Yeah. One of the things you brought up there was talking about teacher training. And I find one of the things that I remember that everybody gets battered into them when they do teacher training is the difference between immediate and delayed feedback. Immediate feedback for me is one of those things that having then been a student in a classroom with Spanish as well, or with Irish, you realize immediate feedback, it's not, personally, I don't like it. I don't think it's constructive or useful, but the more you see it used when you're the student, I mean, I don't use immediate feedback in the classroom because it's rude. I remember doing a Spanish class, and I was aiming far too high, like a complicated sentence that I had no right
you were trying
to do at all. And my Spanish teacher kept correcting so much, and then going off on tangents because obviously she'd been taught an immediate feedback as well. So about 10 minutes later, she's like, "Okay, continue," and I'm standing there going, I have no idea.
No idea.
What I was talking about. No idea what you've just said. My mind is now blank. I don't think immediate feedback is a constructive form of feedback, especially in speaking. Because
I'm going to disagree with you a moment and put some but just maybe for a bit of context, because I think it is useful if they are practicing a form that you've just taught.
If it's a short sentence of something you've just taught, say you're introducing a new grammar point or something,
exactly, they have to produce it right.
Quick responses, that's fine. But if it's an extended piece of speaking, I think it's pointless because it's like you could be there 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree. And I think most teachers with experience would agree, and in fact, lots of the literature would agree as well. But I think if you've just taught a grammar point and you're eliciting short sentence feedbacks and they're not producing the form correctly, then you're storing up problems for later. But with certainly with fluency activities or general tell me about your weekend activities, then no, there's no need for correction immediately. I just write it down, and at some point when I do error correction, I typically have error correction sort of from the last hour all in one go. Here are some things that have happened today.
For stuff like that, I generally do. I aim for a class behind because I find some, especially with adults, they're looking at a list of errors and they're going, "Did I say that? I hope I didn't say that. Did I say that?" Whereas sometimes I've aimed for the previous class, so then they're not aware that this was them, even though it was 2 days previous. So they're less self-conscious when it's, it could be it could be 10 errors made by the same person, but they're not aware of it because it was spoken. So then they correct, they find the corrections if we're doing error correction in class. Or maybe that's just me, and I'm just paranoid. I don't want to make someone feel, because I remember doing that in Spanish class, going, "Damn it, I'm the one that said that."
But I also think oh god, that was Irish, wasn't it? But I also think that is to do with you as the teacher and how the whole ambience, the whole environment of the room is. And I don't think there's necessarily any better or worse way. It's what works for you, because I'm, as you know, already passionate about making and owning errors and mistakes and being perfectly okay with them. And I think that helps the learning process as far as I'm concerned. So whilst I never say, "Oh, this was Jorge, this was Claudia," when I'm doing error correction, I can see, especially with online teaching, and I've got a little school, I can see in the eyes of the student, "Oh, that was me." But it's not in a kind of, "and you got this wrong" way.
Yeah.
Here are some mistakes. And often, whoever it will be, I will say, "that was me and it should be this." Perfect, great job. And then what you've taken is you've actually found an opportunity to praise a student for a mistake they made.
Yeah, because sometimes I do the thing where it's like we celebrate the mistakes. It's like, "Yeah, you got it right, grand." But then if somebody gets something wrong, we go, "Yes, we've done something." Because especially with young learners, I like to do a thing where if they get it wrong, we're progressing on the yellow brick road, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Good. So I don't have to explain it. Yeah.
Well, it does to me.
Yeah. So
we've not got feedback from our listeners about this, so you may need to explain it.
Yeah. So I kind of see it as I don't like to have a teacher-student sort of feeling in the room, where we're sort of just, a team walking along the yellow brick road. And
that's a Wizard of Oz reference. If you're not sure,
we get to use the characters in class sometimes, and we sing different songs, not just somewhere over the rainbow. Including ones that I've found on YouTube from previous academies uploading them. Which somebody sent me going, is this your class? I was like, oh yeah, I taught them 2 years ago. But yeah, so the errors help us on the stepping stones towards Oz, basically, and Oz is then the end of the year, as opposed to what was that? A man standing beside a green wall or something, was it? And smoke and mirrors.
The wizard, yeah. Good story, actually. Wizard of Oz, I mean, and your story, but also the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, someone killing 2 other people over a pair of shoes. I seen that on a was it like a mock film review document where it was all like classic film reviews, but rewritten sarcastically or something. I thought that was quite good. Anyway, different kinds of really going off on tangents here.
So moving on, as I said, I think at the beginning was this idea that feedback is a loop or a cycle, and that therefore it shouldn't just be seen as something that teachers give to students. I know you agree with that. So maybe we should talk a little bit about getting feedback from students.
Yeah, so this is a thing I know you and me have been doing for years because we've found it very useful. So instead of peer observation and DOS observation and shadow teaching and all that, the stop, start, continue method, which I think was originally taken from. Did I read it was taken from the business world somewhere?
Probably it was.
Yeah, but I found it is actually. I would actually say it's one of the best forms of feedback in the classroom. So the way I do stop, start, continue is everybody in the classroom, the 10 students or however many students, get a sheet of paper with stop, start, continue written on 3 sections on the page, and they get 5 minutes. I step out so they can talk with others. And it's kept anonymously, even though we know all of their handwriting, but there's nothing you can do about that.
By the by. Yeah.
So I get them to list anything in class they would like to stop doing, anything in class they would like to start doing, and anything in class they would like to continue with. Yeah. Which I find extremely useful. It's just interesting to see when people know that it's anonymous or as anonymous as possible when there's only 10 in the room. Just what goes on privately in each student's head. It's like a direct contact with them and you, only no one else gets to see it, and in theory is anonymous. So I hope that people are a bit more honest in it. I find it very interesting because it shows some people are, for example, you might get a message sometimes going, I'd like to practice a certain grammar point more and stuff. Yep. So sometimes the rest of the class don't even know feedback is given when our feedback to the stop, start, continue is given. So because it might just be to specific students as well.
Right. So what's nice about it is that then it's actually relatively easy to show that you are responding to the feedback.
Yeah.
You can actually do something specific and concrete in class that tells the student, oh, I read your feedback, I've listened, and here I am doing it. Mm-hmm. It's also, I think, useful, talk about sort of obviously praising students and everything else. Actually, it's also useful for you as a teacher to have that positivity as well, because assuming everything is going relatively well, there are going to be positive comments and things on that feedback, and that's good. I think that's very useful. You know why you're doing things, but if your students then say, "Oh no, can you continue doing X, or can you continue doing Y?" That feels kind of good. Especially, I find if it's something you've done that you're still in the process of testing out. Yes. Because then you think to yourself, "Oh Jesus, that's working. That's class." When you've seen something at a talk or a conference or something, and you've heard about or read about, and you're going, "I'm going to try this. I don't know if it's going to work," and then you
Yeah, and then you get a couple of messages going, "Ooh, that has worked. Ooh, nice." I remember there was one I started doing with folk stories with adults in a B2 class,
Oh yeah.
and everybody loved it. I was really surprised because it was kind of like, I think they'll be interested in it, but I'm not quite sure. And then everybody was like, "Oh, we're doing that again." I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, why not?"
Yeah, exactly. It just lets you. Who do you use it with?
Teens and upwards.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Because I don't think there's with like anybody under 12. I don't think they quite would get why.
Yeah.
Plus, I have tried it once with a group of 12-year-olds, and it was like, "Can we eat sweets in class?" I'm like, right.
Yeah. That's the thing with teens and adults. I also say, look, if it's something that that I can't stop, please don't write it, because I'm not going to stop giving you homework. So writing that is not really that productive, or if it's something that I can't do because it's not possible, or because it's not within the rules of the place where we're working, then I'm going to just disappoint you by not doing it. So it has to be something that I can actually achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For sure.
But I find it very, very useful. How many times would you do it a year? Because I would normally aim 3 times a year if it's an exam class, and probably, I think in non-exam classes I would do it around Halloween, maybe not long after Christmas, and then about April time again.
Twice. I would go end of the first term, end of the second term.
Yeah, I usually do it. Yeah, I suppose it depends. Yeah, because it depends when the year starts with that certain class. Yeah. For a class that started in September, I would probably aim Halloweenish for the first time to do it.
Possibly,
just to make them feel a bit more
listened to,
in control, and listened to. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Especially if they're adults. At that stage, because they need to think they're getting their money's worth and listened to.
Absolutely.
I've got an interesting thing to bring up with you here, Chris.
Have you now, Alan? Why are we going with full names?
That wasn't your full name.
Feels like it. Come on, tell me.
I know. I think one thing that teachers need to be aware of when feedback is involved is, say it is a written document, and say, okay, there's certain word limits on writing. Say for exam classes, you could be looking at 190 words, 260 words, 320 words, whatever. I think there needs to be a level of quality. The teacher has to know what sort of level of quality to give to certain feedback. And I think it has to be relevant to the amount of work they've given you. No, I'm not saying a student has given you a 45-minute, in theory, written essay, 180 words. So you don't sit and give 45 minutes of written
of course not.
Feedback. But I think it needs to be a fair, constructive amount of feedback at the same time.
Yeah.
Some people may know that I like numbers and statistics. So while we've been on lockdown or solitary confinement, whatever you want to call this, I've been doing 2 courses at once, and I have found quite interesting feedback numbers for assignments.
Go on.
So on an academic level, so master's level assignment, which was submitted, I submitted 6,200 words for a certain module. But at the same time, I've been doing the Young Learner Certificate, and the word limit for each of the 7 assignments for that was 500 words. I find it quite interesting that even though there was 500 words given as the upper word limit for the 7 assignments, I got on average 217 words back for each.
Wow.
As feedback. Yeah, which is
for each.
For each, yeah. So 7 modules.
Wow.
500 words each. So I averaged them out. I put all the word limit or the feedback sentences in the Word documents and averaged out the 7 the 7 assignment feedbacks, and it averaged out as 217, which I thought, I mean, that's almost 50%.
That's
which is extraordinary. I mean, the guys in the course, the 2 tutors, have been absolutely superb. They've been brilliant. But then I had a look at the master's level assignments, which I thought was quite interesting. So I submitted on average 6,200 words per the 6 assignments over the year.
Yeah.
Average, what do you think? Average feedback, higher or lower?
Well, I know what I think it probably should be, but I also know what I think you're going to say.
98.
Oh, no.
So I thought that was quite interesting, because I think as teachers, we need to make sure what is useful, and if there's a point to it. And I think, especially as well, if some of that feedback is incorrect, I think it can be more damaging, because it's obviously just there for the sake of it. I get feedback on a certain assignment that said you should capitalize the word academy throughout this document. But you wouldn't capitalize the word school, so no. So I think if you're giving feedback to students, if it's now fair enough, we're all human, and I can't. You might get it wrong. You might read a sentence incorrectly. We've all read sentences incorrectly.
Yes, of course.
Because one of the things I find when you're marking essays, you have them marked, and say it's a weekend, and you come back. What I recommend people do is you come back the next day and take maybe 3. Say there's 10, maybe up to 20. Take 3 or 5, a fair amount, and reread them again and see if you agree with the mark you give them the day before.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a different mindset, you might read a sentence completely differently, and especially if it's somebody's second language you're doing it in as well. I've read some of my Spanish homeworks the next day after like writing them out or handing them in.
Yeah.
And even I don't know what I'm talking about. In a second language, you go, I have no idea what I was trying to say right there.
I think you're zeroing in on something specific and useful, not specific and useful there, which is also we need to be aware of our personal tics when we're marking and giving feedback. That just because it really, really annoys you when something happens, it doesn't actually, that essay doesn't deserve 0 because of that mistake, So that's true. I also think your point about quality of feedback is important, and constructive feedback being important. Capitalizing an A, that's not worth the paper it's written on, in my view. It's someone's opinion. It might be right, but it's not going to impact the overall quality of your next piece of writing. What is it that we're zeroing in on? If we're giving feedback on writing, of course we need to find things that we're going to praise and say that they've done them well, and we're going to find a couple of things that could be done better. But we need to then explicitly say how.
Yeah. Feedback for me is if I. Okay, say I'm the student here. If I submit a piece of work, I get it marked, and there's feedback on it, and then it gets handed back to me. For my next writing, or for my next draft, or for my next similar exercise, I want to look at the previous one and go, here's something constructive. I can then put that into my next. Exactly. It's another step to Oz. Whether you're an adult or a child, here's my next stepping stone to get closer to the big wizard's castle. Was it a castle?
Yeah.
City.
The Emerald City. I think also with quality in that as well, I think we also have to remember that feedback has to directly connect to the task, and to the marking criteria. So if you're giving it points based on a criteria which has been hopefully shared with the students beforehand, then the comments you make need to be able to be okay, so I didn't do that, and in order to get that many points I have to do that, so now I can so the teacher's giving me a particular signpost of what to do. And I think it also has to be fair in the sense that it connects with something the students have encountered. I'll give you an example of something that happened to me during my initial teacher training 10 years ago. I had an observation and I agreed with the observer, or the observer, in fact, it was my first observation. The observer gave me some of what we had done with teaching standards to focus on. So we sort of said, look, these are the standards I'm going to be looking at in this observation. So you know where to focus yourself in terms of that lesson. So we did that. And then when it came to the feedback, pretty much the first thing the observer said was, well, we've got here on the form that your focus were standards A, B, and C, shall we say. But they were easy, and you met all of those. So I've given you feedback about F, Q, and Z. Which you didn't meet. Right. Thanks for that. So, so in that sense, the feedback may have been accurate, the feedback may have been true, the feedback may even have been quality, but it wasn't fair feedback.
Yeah.
So as the student, in that sense, the student teacher, it wasn't feedback I could do anything with, because I'd been told to work on something, I'd worked on it, and then when I got the feedback, it didn't actually relate to the thing I've been working on.
I think that's one of the interesting things with observation, that I think there has to be. I think you have to have that conversation with someone beforehand, because I've worked in places where you've been told, you're being observed between this time and this time. It's not the full class. Say you have a class between say 2:00 to 3:30, but you're being observed from 2:30 to 2:50. And there's no meeting before or after. It's like, well, what are you observing me for then? Whereas I quite like the idea, and I mean, we've done it before. It's like, okay, let's work on this, because I want to look at this A, B, or C, and then see how that goes. Or I think there needs to be a constructive point to it.
Right. Although I think, hang on, I think we're straying into observation territory here, as opposed to direct. I think the point I'm making here is that we put it into teaching English terms. Is that if you something I like to do with my exam classes is say, okay, so we've just spent a couple of lessons working on organizational patterns. In this writing that you're going to do now as homework, I want you to focus on your organizational patterns, or on your vocabulary, or on your paragraphing, or on your linking, whatever it might be. And that when I then give feedback, they all get a sentence about the thing that we've been discussing in class.
Yeah.
Which could be one of the praise sentences. Oh, you've done a great job here. You've done great variety of synonyms. You haven't repeated the same key nouns twice. Great job. Or could you not have thought of another way of saying this? And think about what we've been doing in class. So I think that it's all very well giving accurate and quality and well-meaning feedback, but if it doesn't connect with something the student has done, this would have been better. This would have been better if you'd used use a mixed conditional. Have we studied mixed conditionals? No. Well, not my problem. Why haven't you used one? Now, the truth is, maybe it would have been better with a mixed conditional, but if you haven't taught that to a student, then it's not useful feedback.
Out of interest, how many, say you give an upper intermediate class an essay to write, how many drafts of the one question would you get them writing on? Because I've never gone more than 2 versions of the one writing.
No.
Because they would just get bored after that. And I don't want to focus on the one writing too much. I know people have 3 or 4 copies of the one writing, which I think's slightly excessive. I can see the point, but I generally don't go any more than 2.
No, I don't either. For that reason, and for keeping the flow going as well.
Yeah, because it feels like you're never moving on. You're never getting closer to Oz. I'm gonna start using that much more with adults. Not even just the young learners. I'm in. Because I've just finished the Young Learners course, I'm in such a Young Learners mindset right now.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I can't even remember what it's like doing with adults. So, Chris, what's your preference for getting homeworks handed to you then, if they're writings? I know right now we're stuck with electronic copies, but handwritten essays or electronic essays submitted to you online, do you have a preference?
Well, I didn't. I do now. Because I'd never had them online before. and now I would much rather have them online. As much as I needed to get into the habit of using the comment features and things on Word or on Google Docs, I think it is much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So my preference is purely from the efficiency point of view, more than it is anything else. I also think, given that the students are going to be, many of them doing, I don't know if we're talking about exams, are going to be doing computer-based exams. That is the future. And actually, the majority of the time, they're probably going to be writing on typing. Yeah. So, forcing them to sit down with a piece of paper and a pen.
It's funny how, like, obviously the electronic on a computer is obviously going to be the way forward for a long time. I had 2 entire classes of, well, altogether 20 B2 level students last year, and every one of them opted for the paper version of the exam. But then I was always thinking, when's the last time I wrote 2 A4 pages of text?
Exactly.
Like, unless it's note form or scribbled at a conference or at a talk, or you don't do it. So I always give the students the option, though. You can either hand this to me on paper or hand it to me on, give me it as a Google Doc and I'll put feedback on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite interesting that when is the last time I wrote 2 A4 pages for someone else to read?
By hand.
Yeah, by hand, which I think is quite important. But yeah, I do like the speed of giving feedback, because almost it's immediate. I mean, if you can almost do it at the same time they're writing. But I just found it quite interesting the way I had 20
I've done that.
Adults.
I've done that with one-to-one teaching.
Yeah.
Shared Google Doc.
Mm-hmm.
And my student it was actually for A-level literature, but my student was practicing, writing introductions and things, and was watching him typing on the Google Doc. Mm-hmm. And I would just drop in comments, which was possibly not the most helpful thing to do. But at this point, I've been teaching him for actually quite a few years. So we knew our back and forth, and we were also live on Skype at the same time. So it wasn't like it was just this sort of mute person hovering over typing things. But it was we then sort of ended up co-constructing introduction sort of together, which was kind of the point of the lesson. But I do think that instant thing is useful. It can be much quicker. If a student hands me a piece of writing on Monday, there's not much chance that I'm going to get to it possibly before the following Monday. As in get it back to them before the following Monday if their next lesson is the Wednesday. I would try, but I would definitely not guarantee to do it within the week. But now, when they arrive by email when they're done, as opposed to I get handed 20 essays on a Monday, I now get a couple of essays every day of the week. Well, I tend to just basically download them, correct them, send them back.
Yeah.
So the student gets more instant feedback, and I don't have a pile of essays to mark on a Friday morning.
Have we reached this new thing of, instead of immediate feedback with speech, it's immediate feedback with text? Has technology moved us on from one skill to the other, where immediate feedback is actually possible? Yeah. In doing a course, we had, I think we had 10 people working on the one Google Doc at the same time, which was so quick. It was great because, even that pile of essays you have to write can be intimidating when you have a week to do them. Whereas online, the speed, the ease, and it helps with handwriting as well.
Oh, undoubtedly. I'm correcting what they've actually written than what I think they might have written.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I would end on the sort of e versus paper versions of this, though, is just to say I'm fairly sure, if it hasn't been done, it's in process or needs to happen, is the research to find out whether or not it has as good or better outcomes for students, because there's all sorts of research about the psychology of learning off the page and off of the screen.
Yeah.
That does suggest that actually the piece of paper is better. Mm-hmm. But
Yeah, there's
I
even the
don't-
research behind you learn it more if you write it as opposed to simply
Yes.
typing it as well.
simply typing it. So I think there is some research to be done there about whether or not it's as effective. I'm saying I like it because it's easier. I like it because it's more time efficient. I like it because the students get it back quicker. I like it because I'm not lumping around parts of essays, worrying about leaving them behind somewhere. It remains to be seen as to whether or not it has the desired effect.
I think 5 years from now we'll know a lot more. I think if there was an in-depth longitudinal look in about 5 years' time at that, I think it'd be quite interesting to see what it has to say.
Well, then we'll have to do an episode in 5 years' time that's a retrospective on online marking.
Exactly. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. It is goodbye from me and a goodbye from Chris.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. If you'd like to get in touch, you can tweet us
at PhrasallyV on Twitter.
You can email us
phrasallyverbocious@gmail.com.
You can check out our show notes online at
phrasallyverbociouspodcast.blogspot.com.
And please like, review and comment us on your podcast subscription service of choice. Goodbye.
Goodbye.